Hello all, welcome to the Mughals to Mahatma series. We are dealing with the administrative policies for expansion by the British. The time period that we are dealing with here is from 1757 to 1857. 1857 is the year in which the revolt of 1857 or the first war of independence takes place. And with that, you have the Act of Good Governance also coming. One of the important provisions of Act of Good Governance is to stop the annexations. Why is the government of Britain coming up with something like stopping the annexations here? Because the period before that, 1757 to 1857, is marked by a series of annexations. This is the period in which the consolidation of the British territory in India is taking place. It went to an extent that you have something like the revolt of 1857 in this period. Now, when you annex a country like India, you cannot annex everything through war alone. You also have to have diplomacy, you should have deceit, you should have administrative policies. In this video, we are dealing with three such administrative policies: doctrine of lapse, the ring of fence, and subsidiary alliance. So to start this, we have to go back to the term imperialism. We have a video separately discussing all these terminologies related to British expansion. I'll just revoke the term imperialism here. Imperialism is a political theory. It deals with a nation extending its power over other countries or people. So just imagine a nation that can be called as an imperial power, and imagine another nation that can be called as a conquested power or a colony or a power that is under the subjugation of the imperial power. Imperialism has various dimensions. Territorial expansion is there, economic control is there, hard power is there, and soft power is there. Now, soft power deals with things like Orientalism, where they come up with theories like the white man's burden. So, when, for example, doctrine of lapse is implemented by Lord Dalhousie, he is annexing every state after the other. He has annexed 7 states, and the justification he gives lies in the soft power. He says that it is the white man's burden to civilize the Orient. So that's soft power. Hard power means direct war. When they are fighting the Anglo-Mysore war, it's hard power. Economic power, economic control means controlling the markets in India, destroying the crafts in India, taking raw materials from here, making finished goods out of it, and supplying it to the Indian market. That's economic control. Then on the whole, territorial expansion is also happening. I've given you these terms in the previous lecture. Just take this term out of that: mercantilism. This is what is relevant for us in this discussion. Now, mercantilism means a deliberate tweaking of the current account. You are doing trade to get surplus. So every policy that you're doing is to get a current account surplus. That means your imports should be less than your exports. When your imports is less than your exports, what happens? You will be getting more money. You will be having a current account surplus. This is economics. But in India's case, it doesn't happen because India is the sink of precious metals. India is self-sufficient comparatively. 60% of the goods are getting exported out of India from Bengal alone. So that is the condition with India. So how do you expand? How do you get a current account surplus with India? That is through war as well as tactics. Here we have discussed a series of wars in our previous videos. I've told you to club them together and study. When you study the northwestern region of India, club Anglo-Sikh War, the Sindh annexation, and the Afghan annexation together. When you study the south of India, club Anglo-Mysore War, Anglo-Maratha War, the Carnatic Wars together. When you study the eastern part of India, study Awadh, Bengal, and the Mughals together. When it comes to tactics, I've told you we are going to discuss 3 between 1757 to 1857. 1757 because this is where Battle of Plassey starts. This is where the conquest or the expansion of the British starts in India. 1857, Good Governance Act. Annexation comes to an end. See, these are the three policies that we are going to discuss today. And in these three policies, you have to associate one person each. Whenever the term ring of fence is referred in the question paper, remember the name Warren Hastings, the first Governor General of India, 1772. Can be called as the first Governor General of Bengal because that time the Confederacy was around the region of Bengal. Calcutta was the capital. Next up, subsidiary alliance, and the term to remember here is Wellesley. Lord Wellesley, the Governor General. He was also the Governor General from 1798 to 1805. Next up, you have Doctrine of Lapse, and the name associated is Lord Dalhousie. So these three people, three of them are imperialist rulers. That's why I invoked the term in the beginning. When you call a ruler imperialist, remember that these are people who are trying to expand or dominate. And they have come up with different strategies for that. Ring of fence, subsidiary alliance, doctrine of lapse. Let's start with the ring of fence. Every terminology can be deciphered. Such terminologies can be deciphered from the term itself. Now let's see. Ring of fence. What does that mean? It has two catches in the term itself. First of all, it's a fence. Fence means what? It's a border. Second, it has the term ring. What does that mean? You're making a border and making a ring out of it. So a ring of a fence. And what are you fencing? Whenever we are fencing, we should fence something, right? There should be something in the middle to be fenced. What we are fencing here is the English East India Company territories or the British possessions in India. And how do they fence? They fence it with the territory of the princely state. Suppose imagine the British East India Company has a capital here. They have a fort here. All their wealth is kept here. Now, if an external power comes and attacks them, they'll have to defend this frontier. What if they make the princely state around them their border, their buffer? The term can be used here as buffer. So any external state coming or any external power coming to attack them will have to first fight with this princely state. They have to first cross this buffer. Only then they can reach the East India Company territories. That's ring of fence. So you are making a ring of fence with a princely state's territory. That's the whole idea. I'll illustrate this with an example. So the capital of British or the center of their power during this time, 1772, during the time of Warren Hastings, was Bengal or Calcutta. Bengal is lying here. Right on the northwest region of Bengal, you have Awadh. So you have invasions coming from Afghans and you have invasions coming from Marathas. If the British East India Company doesn't have the ring of fence strategy, they will have to defend their territory. But what they do, they use the territories of Afghanistan, Awadh and Bengal to defend themselves. So the princely state, the Nawab, they will defend the territory here, and in fact, the British is getting protection. Go back to the year 1765. Battle of Buxar is being fought here, and Treaty of Allahabad is being signed. When you sign the Treaty of Allahabad, why do you think the British is not annexing Awadh directly? Why do you think the British is not annexing Bengal directly? Why are they signing a treaty and they are getting the Diwani and the Nizamat right alone? Because of this. If they annex the territory completely, they'll have to defend the territory. If they're not annexing the territory completely, that means they can enjoy all the privileges. The Diwani and the Nizamat, and the Nawab is going to defend his territory. The Nawab should look after the welfare of the people. This can also be combined with the idea of double government of Warren Hastings. What is double government? You will get the rule, you will get the power without responsibility. You get Diwani right, the revenue right, you get Nizamat right, the judicial, the police, the military right, but you are not responsible for anything. If famine comes, you are not responsible. If external power comes, you are not responsible. If Maratha invasions comes, you are not responsible. The Nawab is responsible. But you are getting all the revenue from that place. You have absolute power in the form of Nizamat as well. So this is the system. When you study ring offense associated with the regime of Warren Hastings, combine it with double government and see the situation here. Calcutta, Afghan invasions and Maratha raids. And you're using Awadh as a frontier for your own territory. That's ring offense. I hope that particular concept is clear for you. Next, let's go to the second concept, which is subsidiary alliance. Here again, let's decipher the term from the terminology itself. First of all, it talks about subsidiary. It means someone is there on top and someone is subsidiary. Second, it talks about an alliance. An alliance means there should be two parties and two parties should be getting something from each other. Otherwise, it's not an alliance. If it's a treaty, for example, the treaty that we signed after wars, the Allahabad Treaty, or the Treaty of Versailles signed after World War One, it's always one-sided. But here it's an alliance. Alliance means you need benefits in both sides. Now see what the princely state is getting in the first place. First of all, the princely state is given the protection of their territory. If a subsidiary alliance is signed, the British will give protection to the princely state with their superior military. First point. Second, the British will not, by British I mean the East India Company, the British will not interfere in the internal matters of the princely state. So think from the perspective of the princely state. Okay, we are getting the protection of a very superior military and they are not going to interfere in our internal matters as well. So it's a good deal for the princely state, right? But see what the British is getting from that. See the other side of it. First of all, in the capital of the princely state, you have to appoint someone called the resident, the East India Company resident. Now this resident will overlook everything that the princely state is doing. It's like officially appointing a spy, an official spy with a lot of powers. So everything that is happening within the princely state will be overlooked by the resident, especially the diplomatic relation that the states are having with others. This can be with another princely state as well as a foreign power. Everything is getting overlooked by the resident. So you are appointing someone from top here. Next up, no external diplomacy. Once you accept the subsidiary alliance, for example, if Tipu Sultan is accepting the subsidiary alliance, Tipu Sultan cannot install the Tree of Liberty in Mysore. Tipu Sultan cannot be a member of the Jacobean Club because that's part of external diplomacy. You know that Tipu Sultan was a very close aide of the French. That's why I used that example. That cannot be done. No external diplomacy. That's the second clause. Third, a force of the British has to be maintained within the princely state at the expense of the state. Now these are the 5 important clauses of subsidiary alliance. This was a UPSC previous year question as well. What is not a feature of princely state subsidiary alliance? And the answer was a fixed income. Does subsidiary alliance demand a fixed income from the princely state? No, it doesn't. So it's not a feature of the subsidiary alliance. Fixed income is not a feature. Let it be very clear. Let's be very clear with that. See the 5 features: protection of territory, non-interference, appointment of resident, no external diplomacy, and maintenance of force at the expense of the princely state. And this is not a treaty for the British to gain any fixed income. Be very clear. But there is one hidden intention. This was also part of the options of the UPSC previous year question, which is Napoleonic conquest. Was this one of the intentions of Lord Wellesley when he came up with subsidiary alliance? Yes, it was. Because this was the time when Napoleonic invasions are happening. You imagine the territory of India like this. It is from here the European invasions will come. Here you have Russia on top. You have Europe here, which is Napoleon. You also have, look at this, Mauritius. This is a French colony at that time. French took it from the Dutch, so they can attack India from this side as well. So what the British need is buffer all around. How do you create the buffer? You create it with the princely state. So subsidiary alliance is an extension of the ring of fence in that sense. But in subsidiary alliance, you have a very clear-cut treaty. You cannot have external diplomacy. Very clear with that. You will have a resident. Very clear with that. So Napoleon is a very important reason for that. That also should be clear. Now, subsidiary alliance is not installed all of a sudden. It has 4 stages. And that's how the princes are ready to accept it. All of a sudden, if the British come and say that you have to maintain our troop in your expense, the princes are not going to accept that. So first the British will say that we'll help you. Take the case of Marathas versus Mysore. So when Madhav Rao was alive, he was conquering the territories of Hyder Ali. When Madhav Rao died, Mysore was conquering the territories of Madhav Rao or the Marathas. So constant raids and invasions are happening. So if British is offering help to any one of them, they'll easily take it because they have a superior army. The British will initially offer the help. Next step, they will form alliance where both British forces and the princely states forces will fight together from a help to an alliance. Later they will say that okay, now we'll maintain an army in your territory so that whenever there is an external threat, we'll fight for you. But just make sure that you pay for that. That's it. And finally they'll say, okay, you have to make the payment, but the payment we'll fix it. And they'll fix it at a very high rate. What happened as a result? These princely states were deprived of all their revenues because they cannot pay the British army. Because the British kept the revenue at a very high rate. These are the impacts of the subsidiary alliance system. High revenue, exhaustion of revenue. Next step, the leadership is getting irresponsible. Because what is happening? You don't have absolute power. Your foreign relation is getting controlled by the British. Your revenue right is getting compromised by the British. The British troops are in your country. So you don't have any absolute power. So you are becoming irresponsible. The princely states are getting irresponsible. Their leadership is weakening. And if at all their leadership is getting weakened, can the people replace it with a new leader? No, they cannot. Because whoever there is getting support of the British. So British, the idea is they want a puppet in the throne and they want to take control. And the puppet will naturally be irresponsible. And the people or anyone else cannot replace the puppet because he will be controlled by the East India Company. So this was the impact of the subsidiary alliance. Irresponsibility, lack of alternatives, and revenue exhaustion. And subsidiary alliance has an evolution. Let's go back to the Battle of Buxar, 1764. After that, the Treaty of Allahabad was signed. When this treaty was signed, the company started maintaining an army in Awadh territory. So you can say Awadh was one of the first states where you had a raw form of subsidiary alliance. But remember, it's a raw form of subsidiary alliance. The company maintained its army here, but there was no clause like a resident. There was no clause like no external diplomacy. That came with Carnatic. Here in 1787, the company asserted that you should not have external diplomacy. So these are the initial state that had a subsidiary alliance, but a very raw form. The proper subsidiary alliance was signed with the state of Hyderabad, 1798. This is the order. This was again a previous year UPSC question. So study the order carefully. Hyderabad, the first state to sign, 1798. Hyderabad was often an ally of the British when they were fighting the Anglo-Mysore wars. So this was their first loyalist. Next up, Mysore, 1799, the year in which Tipu Sultan died. And the British reinstated the Wadayar dynasty after that. And they signed the subsidiary alliance with the Wadayars. That's the context of it. Tanjore, Awadh. Awadh is the state that was annexed. Initially, I told you, Battle of Buxar, but proper subsidiary alliance signed in 1801. Peshwa, the Maratha territories. Peshwa was the power center. He was the prime minister. Next up, you have Bhosle, Scindia. So the Marathas will keep signing one by one. They don't sign all of a sudden. In the last person to sign subsidiary alliance is the Holkar, 1818. Remember this, Holkar, and remember the first Hyderabad. Remember Mysore that comes immediately after that, and the Marathas in the middle. Now let's move to the last and final concept, which is the doctrine of lapse. Here again, let's go to the concept and decipher it. It is a doctrine. What is a doctrine? Doctrine is a principle, a law. Doctrine of lapse. What is lapsing here? The sovereignty is lapsing here. Whose sovereignty is lapsing? The sovereignty of the prince or the king. And what is the context of it? Imagine I am a king or you are a king and you have a territory to rule, and who will be your successor? Your son will be a successor because it's a patriarchal society. Your son is going to be a successor. What if you don't have a son? Then you adopt a son. The British said that you can adopt a son, no problem, but the son can only inherit your private property. The son cannot inherit the state from you. They call this the doctrine of lapse. So every king or every princely state without a legal biological heir is subjected to doctrine of lapse. Their territory will lapse. Now the British said that this is one thing that is based on Hindu law. And they invoked Ranjit Singh because Ranjit Singh did this. They said that as per Hindu law, if you don't have a male son who's a biological son to inherit your property, you cannot pass on the state to him. Kings like Ranjit Singh did this before. Now, interestingly, you can see the same principle being applied in post-independence India as well. The claim of a princely state is coming to a lapse when they don't have a biological heir, a male heir. So the British used the same principle, but there was no hard and fast rule like this before. The British made it into a law that is in favor of them. There were instances where Ranjit Singh did this, but it was small territories. What the British proposed was to annex the complete state if there was no biological heir. The clause was in fact the Queen will decide. The British Crown will decide whether you can annex it or not. But if you don't have a male heir, that means the decision making power is with the British. That's the whole idea. So that's doctrine of lapse. Remember, it's a doctrine. Every three principles that we described, it has different natures. Here it is doctrine. The previous one was an alliance. Before that, it was about a border, fence. Now see this person. She is Rani Chennamma. She belongs to the region of Kittur. Rani Chennamma of Kittur. So here, Rani Chennamma's husband died. He was the king of the region. This is in Karnataka. Kittur is in Karnataka. She had a son, but this son also died. So she adopted a son. But the British said that we are not going to recognize his sovereignty of the reign because he is not a biological son. So she rose in revolt. In the first revolt, she won. In the second revolt, she lost. So in 1854, Sep 24 itself, you can see glimpses of doctrine of lapse. So if there is a question whether Lord Dalhousie is the originator of doctrine of lapse, wrong answer. Even before Lord Dalhousie, whose reign is from 1848 to 1856, you have the idea of doctrine of lapse. 1824, Rani Chennamma of Kittur, the same principle is applied. The actual people that took brain behind this is the court of directors. This is something that you will study when you study the Regulating Act of 1772. The company's affairs were divided into the board of control and court of directors. So that court of directors will decide this. They are the brain behind this. Lord Dalhousie, when he was as the Governor General between 1848 and 56, he had a lot of states who didn't have a biological heir. So he was lucky enough to annex a lot of states under the doctrine, but he was not the originator. It was in fact the court of directors. And you have states like Kittur that was annexed before that. When it comes to Dalhousie annexed 7 states. In fact 8, 7 under doctrine of lapse. They are in the order Satara 1848 first. Now Satara is a principality that British formed after the Anglo-Maratha Wars. Alright. So after the Anglo-Maratha War, Satara was formed. Satara was annexed 1848, first state to annex. Second, 49, 2 states, Jaidpur and Sambalpur. I have given the modern names as well. Sambalpur is Odisha, Jaidpur is Bundelkhand. 1850, Bhagat, Himachal Pradesh. Udaipur, 1852. Jhansi, 1853. Nagpur, 1854. He also annexed Awadh. But this was not doctrine of lapse, don't mistake it for that. There was no question of heir because the king was Wajid Ali Shah. His son Bijurskada was there. So it was not doctrine of lapse. Instead, the reason for annexing Awadh was maladministration. Now you remember everything and connect it. Remember the first principle that we discussed, ring of fence. I told you Awadh was used as a fence against Bengal, against Afghanistan and Maratha invasions. For the protection of the British territory in Bengal, they used Awadh as a fence. I also told you that it was part of the double government system. So there was no responsibility. So Awadh was under a lot of distress. And British found this as a reason and they annexed it for maladministration. But what happened as a result was a revolt of 1857. You have Jhansi under doctrine of lapse, Rani Lakshmi Bai is rising. You have Nana Sahib rising from Nagpur, Pune region, Peshwa. You have the Awadh region. A lot of sepoys were from Awadh region. And Wajid Ali Shah was a popular leader. You have them rising as the sepoy revolt. So the culmination of it is in the sepoy revolt. And after that, as I told you, the Good Governance Act or the Government of India Act 1858 comes into picture, and that's a different story. We'll explain that. One of the important principles of that is to stop annexations. So you connect everything starting from ring of fence till the Government of India Act 1858, and the entire context will be clear. As I said, 3 people, 3 names, 3 natures. Remember it like that. And of course, you can remember the dates as well as the annexation sequence for the UPSC prelims. That's it. Thank you for listening.